Hi and welcome to the Cinnabar. If you like vintage lever actions and you like vintage military rifles, today we've got the best of both worlds. We're going to be talking about the Winchester Model 1895 muskets. I think we've got an example of just about every variety that they made. So stick around while we talk about the history of these really interesting guns and then do a little shooting. Well, today we're filming from a little different part of the ranch than we have been in the past, so we'll just pan around here and kind of show you where we're filming from today, and then we'll take a look at some pretty interesting muskets. Okay, so here we go. Here's our 1895 muskets that we're going to be talking about today, and we may even take one or two of them down and do a little shooting. We'll get up here a little closer. At the bottom here, we'll start off with a 30-03 NRA musket produced for NRA match competition. The next one up is a real kind of an unusual one. It's a 30-40 Craig version of the NRA musket, but it letters with a checkered shotgun butt, which is very, very unusual. So it has a very much of a different look to it than most muskets. The next one up is a Colorado National Guard musket. Next up the line is a Kentucky National Guard musket. Next one here is a well-used, as most of them are, U.S. contract musket. And then of course on top is the Russian contract musket. So stick around, we'll get set up and we'll talk a little bit about each one of these, and then we'll see if we can't put a few rounds through them. So let's just talk briefly about each of these muskets before we get started shooting. As I mentioned earlier, this NRA musket on the bottom here, chambered in 30-03. Now it's a little different configuration. You'll notice it's got a shorter barrel, only a 24-inch barrel. They produced these two versions of the NRA musket, in the bottom one in 30-03, and they also produced a 30-06 in a NRA musket with a 24-inch barrel. One of the big differences too, you'll notice, is that the rear sight is moved all the way to the very back part of the barrel, and so what they did, because of the shorter barrel, to make a better sight radius, then they moved that rear sight back. And most of them have a Craig Jorgensen rear sight, although you could get a regular standard 1895 musket or carbine sight on them as well. But the handguards are a little bit different. Now, one of the problems with NRA muskets for collectors is that a lot of people back in the day discarded the handguards, the upper portion of the front forend, and they're very hard to come by because they are machined differently to have the cutout in the very back rather than in the center, like they do on the rest of the muskets and carbines. The handguard for the standard muskets and the 1895 carbines are identical, so they're interchangeable. So this NRA musket is a little different design. It also has a straight butt plate rather than a little bit of a curved butt plate like the rest of the carbines and muskets had. So they're kind of an unusual design, special made for the NRA match competitions. The next one up then is the NRA musket in 30-40 Craig. Now the 30-40 Craig NRA musket is a little unusual as well, in that it was the only standard version of an 1895 made with a 30-inch barrel. Unfortunately, the example we have here has a replacement barrel that's only 28 inches. Typically it would have a 30-inch barrel. One of the things you may have noticed when we were taking a close-up is that this one has an NRA stamp across the front of the receiver on the left side, and that was done on the NRA muskets that were sold actually through the National Rifle Association. If they came directly from Winchester, they don't have a stamp. As I've been told, the ones that would have the NRA stamp were sold by the National Rifle Association. The next one up is one of the few military contracts that Winchester did get with these 1895s. This is a Colorado National Guard musket, and this one's really easily recognizable because on the other side of the receiver, it says right down the side of the receiver, Colorado National Guard. It has some other markings for rack markings and that type of thing. So they're really easy to distinguish. The next one up is part of a Kentucky National Guard contract, and they're not so easy to distinguish. In fact, you basically have to buy the 1895 Winchester book that was written last year by Rob Cassab and Brad Dunbar, because they actually found it at the Cody Firearms Museum the records where the Kentucky National Guard had purchased these 1895 muskets, so they know what order numbers and what serial numbers went with that order. So we have tracked this one, and it is actually part of one of the orders that went to the Kentucky National Guard. Then the next one up here is part of the U.S. contract. Now, Winchester worked really hard to get these military contracts, and particularly with the U.S. government. During the Spanish-American War, the U.S. military was really needing guns. They were really behind. All they really had, or they were using mostly in the trenches, was the trapdoor Springfield still. So they were way behind. So Winchester secured that contract for 10,000 rifles. By the time they were produced and delivered, the Spanish-American War was over. There was still some fighting going on in the Philippines, so they sent 100 of them to the Philippines to try them out in the field. Unfortunately, they got a very poor review, so they were sent back, and all of them were sold off, and almost all of them went to South America, Cuba mostly. So most of them have been used very, very hard, and this one's no different. U.S. muskets in nice condition are very hard to come by. There are just not many of them out there because, for obvious reasons, when they went to South America and Cuba, they got put through the ringer a little bit. Now the next one is really the only real success story in Winchester's desire to get military contracts with these 1895 muskets. When the First World War broke out, Russia was even worse condition than we were going into the Spanish-American War as far as guns were concerned. They had far more soldiers than they had rifles, and they were desperate to get rifles. So Winchester actually got a contract with the Russian government to produce these rifles, but the Russians wanted them in their caliber, which their standard military rifle at the time was a bolt-action Mosin Nagant. So they had to make these not only in that caliber, but to accept a stripper clip that was the same that went into the Mosins. So Winchester had to retrofit. You can see on this one the stripper clip guides. That's a real easy way to identify a Russian musket. There are a couple of other differences in Russian muskets as well. One being the rear sight. Now the rear sight on a Russian musket is graduated in what is known as arshins, which is an old Russian unit of measure, and it's roughly about 28 inches. So, you know, it differs from the yards on our regular musket sights by about 8 inches per yard. So, you know, if you're looking at 100 yards out, you know, these are going to tell you, if you're using the Arshin sight, they're going to be about 80 yards. So they're not going to be a whole lot of difference there. But the further you get out there, the bigger the difference gets. So they're a little bit different when you look at them than the standard U.S. sights, and certainly in a different measurement. I don't think Arshins are used at all anymore. I think the Russians, like most of the rest of the world, have gone to the metric system now. Let's see. Oh, the other big difference is in the bayonets. Now the U.S. musket takes this 8-inch bayonet, and when the Winchester first sent the first contracts of the Russian muskets to the Russians, they sent an 8-inch bayonet like this. Russians didn't like that. They didn't want to just poke somebody. They wanted to run them through. So this is what Winchester came up with. Much to the delight of the Russians, a 16-inch saber bayonet. And so it's pretty obvious when you look at the difference. Now there is another difference as well, which is really unusual for Winchester, because they typically always made interchangeable parts. But this bayonet and this bayonet don't interchange. The US won't fit on a Russian bayonet lug or barrel, and the Russian won't fit on a US bayonet lug or barrel. They've made them enough different, and for whatever reason, they did that. So they're not interchangeable. You can look at them, and they do not look very similar. The lug itself is a completely different shape, thickness, width. So unusually as well, the NRA muskets are equipped with the Russian style bayonet lug and front barrel band. But of course, they didn't equip them with bayonets. There wasn't a whole lot of need for a bayonet when you were out shooting national match. So I think they just had a lot of those left over from the Russian contract and put them on more as just a fore-end barrel band than anything else. So there's kind of a quick overview. Each of these muskets we could do a whole video on by themselves, and maybe we'll do that at some point in time, but that's just kind of a quick overview of things. And so you've got a little bit of an introduction, and let's go over and see if they shoot. Okay, so this first NRA musket, this isn't the one I showed you earlier, that 30-03. This one's a 30-06. It's been reblued, so I don't mind taking it out and shooting it from time to time. So I've shot it quite a little bit. So today I'm going to go ahead and shoot this one. Now a 30-03, for those of you who haven't heard of that particular caliber, was a precursor to the 30-06. It had just a slightly longer case neck, and they were prone to splitting. So when Springfield went back to redesign it, all they did was just kind of shorten up the case neck a little bit on a 30-06, and that seemed to solve the problem. So actually a 30-06 cartridge can be shot through a 30-03 chamber, but not vice versa. The 30-03, which is very rare to come by now, wouldn't chamber in a 30-06 because they're just a little bit too long. Whoops, that thing's kind of stiff. Wow, it does a job on those milk jugs, doesn't it? Well, that was a good show. Police this brass a little bit so I don't step on it. Okay, so next up is this NRA musket 3040 Craig. This is a real interesting one. Now this, I talked a little bit about this buttstock lettering as a factory shotgun butt, rubber butt plate. That comes from the factory records in Cody Firearms Museum in Wyoming. This isn't the actual original buttstock. The actual original buttstock would have had a fancy grain to it. This has been a replacement. But this was really, when it left the factory, was really a special gun. Let's see how it shoots. This is the first day I've ever shot this gun. It's a little stiff too. Two with one shot. Oh, over the top. Okay, we got some more targets up. Let's try this Colorado National Guard musket. Now, there's kind of a dark chapter in the history of the Colorado National Guard. I think it was during the First World War. There was a labor uprising in some of the mines in Colorado, and the National Guard was sent in, and it ended up being bloodshed, and there were several of the miners were killed. I'd kind of like to think that this particular rifle wasn't involved in all that. Let's see how it shoots. Oh, right over the top of it. Let's try a little lower. Oh, same thing. There, we got it. Let's see if we can do that again. Oh, right over the top. So she shoots a little high. Okay, so now we are to this Russian musket. And I have to admit, actually that Colorado National Guard and this one I hadn't shot till today. I just to put it through its paces and test it out, I put it on the lead sled and put a round or two through it, and it seemed to function okay, so we're going to give it a try. This is the first time I've loaded with a stripper clip, so we're going to put that Mosin Nagant stripper clip that I bought at a gun show for next to nothing in, and we're going to shove those down. There we go. Works pretty slick. Let's see how they feed now. Hey, it even works. Okay, let's give it a try. A little bit high. There, we got it. Whoa, just clipped it a little bit. Okay, let's see about them steel targets. There we go. Oh, I got both jugs. Must have been some shrapnel. Let's see if we can't finish that one off. There, we got a big hole in it now. Okay, so now we're out of ammo. What are we going to do? There's an incoming charge. It's time to fix bayonet. Isn't that a rough looking piece of work right there? Well, this has been all sorts of fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have. Until next time, happy trails from the Cinnabar. If you'd like to learn more about 1895 muskets, make sure and get a copy of this book, Winchester Model 1895, Last of the Classic Lever Actions. It's written by my good friends Rob Cassab and Brad Dunbar. And it is just a fantastic reference book for 1895s in particular and Winchesters in general. There's a whole chapter in here on the US contract muskets. There's another whole chapter on the Russian contract muskets. And then there's of course a lot of information on the other varieties as well. So do yourselves a favor and pick up a copy of this book at your earliest convenience. You won't be sorry that you did.